For most of the digital era, tech sectors stayed in their lanes. The rules were predictable. Console manufacturers used exclusives to sell hardware. Digital art was the result of human labor, and government networks were shielded by layers of isolation and encryption. But by mid-2026, those lanes are beginning to merge and blur. The distinctions between a consumer device and a national security risk, or a human artist and a generative tool, are becoming harder to define. We are seeing a trend where the technical systems we rely on for entertainment, work, and security are simultaneously becoming more volatile. To understand why this shift is happening now, we have to look at the friction appearing across 3 different levels, from the consoles in our living rooms to the creative studios, and finally into the classified servers of the FBI. At the consumer level, the friction starts with a shift in identity. In June 2026, Xbox CEO Asha Sharma announced that major titles like Gears of War E-Day and Clockwork Revolution would remain permanent console exclusives, reversing a recent trend of moving games to competing platforms. But that clear line was immediately complicated by Matt Booty, Xbox's chief content officer. He followed the announcement with a more fluid case-by-case strategy, suggesting that multi-platform releases are still very much on the table for other titles. This creates a confusing logic for the consumer. While multiplayer games move toward a multi-platform model to keep server populations high, single-player games are left to individual evaluation. There is no longer a single, predictable rule for where these games will end up. This lack of a clear framework forces developers into a difficult position. They have to decide whether to optimize for a single hardware architecture or build for multiple systems without knowing the final release plan. For the gamer, it changes the value proposition of the hardware. If the rules of exclusivity are constantly shifting, the decision to invest $500 into a specific ecosystem becomes a much larger gamble. Moving from hardware to the creation of the games themselves, Sega recently faced backlash over its transparency regarding Crazy Taxi World Tour. Sega disclosed that they are using generative AI specifically for background assets, things like city buildings, neon street signs, and background trees. They maintained that no AI was used for characters or performers, framing the technology as a utility for repetitive, time-consuming tasks. The concern for artists isn't just about background clutter, it's about where the line is drawn next. This scale shows the progression. If AI is acceptable for environmental assets today, it becomes easier to justify its use for character design or full-scale automation tomorrow. Sega's disclosure is a rare moment of corporate honesty, but it signals a shift in the production baseline. The assumption that high-budget digital experiences are entirely human-made is no longer a certainty. This data from TechCrunch shows that 2026 is becoming a historically difficult year for cybersecurity. In April alone, over 50 million records were leaked, with attacks targeting government contractors and major code repositories. But the most significant breach involved the FBI. A Chinese state-sponsored group known as Salt Typhoon successfully penetrated the agency's internal surveillance network. The hackers accessed the Digital Collection System Network, or DCSN. This system contains lists of phone numbers under surveillance and data related to sensitive FISA warrants, essentially the FBI's master list of active investigations. The breach went undetected for 4 months. Salt Typhoon gained entry in November 2025, but the FBI didn't identify the suspicious activity until March 2026. This created a significant tactical advantage for the Chinese government. By seeing which numbers were being monitored, they could identify which of their operatives or informants were under FBI scrutiny and adjust their operations accordingly. Because of this access window, the FBI now has to operate under the assumption that every investigation active during those 4 months was potentially compromised. This incident demonstrates that even the most isolated and legally protected surveillance systems are susceptible to prolonged, undetected monitoring by foreign adversaries. Take Xbox's messaging, Sega's background assets, and the FBI surveillance data might seem like unrelated headlines. However, they all highlight a common theme. The systems we expected to be stable and predictable are becoming increasingly difficult to manage. In 2026, the idea of a guaranteed platform, whether it's a game console's library, the human origin of art, or the security of federal data, is being tested. As our everyday technical infrastructure becomes more complex, the predictability we once took for granted is being replaced by a volatile reality.